Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Kaylee Filio. I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager with PartsEdge. I'm just going to kick off the webinar, and Blake Featherly, he's one of our inventory specialists, is going to be presenting today. And we also have Chuck Hartley here, one of the founders of PartsEdge. So welcome. We're going to talk about parts inventory, not a perfect science, focusing on stock orders, special orders, and profitability. So Blake, take it away.
Thanks, Kaylee. Hi, everyone. As Kaylee said, yep, I'm part of the PartsEdge team. Many of you probably know Chuck Hartley, and if you don't, like Kaylee said, he owner-operator of PartsEdge, one of the co-founders. Largely what we do based on his ideas or intellectual prowess when it comes to parts inventory. And that's kind of one of our mottos. We put it up there, this is not a perfect science, but also the extension of that motto is we really, through what we do and what we'll kind of share today, and this is definitely part of it, is, minimize the bad and maximize the good. And that directly correlates to this and why we kind of chose it as a topic when it comes to, the stock orders, special orders, and again, how that plays into the profitability of your department. And kind of why we're doing these webinars and why we got back into them. And this one will largely be kind of the 30,000 foot view. We're more than willing to stop, if any of you have a question, if any of you have any particulars about, at the end, we can cover it more DMS specific if you like, in terms of the parameters of integrating this into your system, the more specifics. But again, this webinar is to kind of cover the broad view of it, the more philosophical approach, really to start the conversation, maybe spur some ideas, maybe spur some strategy for you. We'll kind of use some examples of clients that we interact with using our service to kind of backbone them, but also, the strategy that they've implemented in their department to be successful. So, but again, we appreciate you taking the time to join us today and kind of go through this always fun topic. So really, the point, the growing importance of effective management. We live this day in and day out. Chuck and I, this is what we do. Like you guys, we live in the parts, but we live in the specific, DMS management of this. This is our quote name of the game is effectively managing the inventory. But if you're not on our service, that doesn't mean you're not out in the wind. It still very much pertains to, of course, effectively doing this and making sure you get in front of this and are doing it properly. Really, as we see with this, concerns with fulfillment, like things we've all likely faced very recently and will continue to face, when it comes to dock strikes or the OE specifically having a strike, not being able to get those parts, not being able to fulfill the stock orders. Then we come up against things with, the fast moving parts, ASR programs, things of that nature running into issues that, as it states, impact your day-to-day operations. So we're kind of covering those topics to, again, start thinking of some potential strategy to really, shift from being reactive, more into that proactive nature and how to focus on, again, how you look at the stock order versus doing what you have to do in regards to special orders and strategies there.
Blake, and you bring up a good point, and that's really what we're going to try and cover here is the point of this whole webinar is, back that the last bullet point on the last slide, poor inventory management negatively affects dealership profitability and CSI. What that can boil down to, especially with ASRs, is a lot of dealerships, and you may be one of them, Uh, you're on rim or arrow. That's what ASR means, automatic stock replenishment. But poor inventory management from that standpoint, and we see this day in and day out, isn't a matter of the manager is uh, doing a bad job as much as they don't understand the ASR programs. And that's kind of what we mean by that is, you know, GM and Chrysler, especially, and to some degree Ford, you get lulled into this comfort zone, and okay, they're guaranteeing everything that sells, which we find really isn't necessarily the truth. They manage what sells, but that ends up being 40 or 50% of your inventory. And then you have no means whatsoever, and that's where Blake will go into this. You don't have the means to get rid of the parts that they don't guarantee that they don't sell. And that's where we've seen dealerships that very successfully are handling special orders and really controlling those parts that aren't guaranteed really help a lot toward driving profitability in CSI. So with that, Blake, take back over. That was my 2 cents for that.
No, very, very good points, Chuck. Absolutely. And it's one of those, to even point out, like you said, poor inventory management and not being, the fault of the manager. It's an excellent way to point that out. And it's really, when it comes to the ASR program, who benefits from it. And that kind of gets us into this point, okay, what now? Well, what strategies do you implement? And again, it brings around, the elephant in the room, or that potential battle. Anytime we bring up special orders, it tends to, and again, it's largely that elephant, the quote battle between parts and service. But that's one, and through our clients and just through the industry, that's where we try to really shift that narrative and shift the strategy from it being a point of conflict to, being a point of unity. Because really, again, I mean, as you all know, not speaking in such philosophical terms, but, when you work together, that's where everybody gets to be profitable. But being that all things flow through you in the parts department, that's where it can become that conflict where, we all know that, you're never going to have all the parts that the service wants. Technicians are going to come to you, whether they gripe at you, oh, you never have anything. That sort of, fundamental narrative that starts, happening within any service department. We've all faced it, that's just how it kind of goes. And to some degree, you can't change that. But through the understanding of the metrics like ASR and things like that, again, taking that proactive approach to understand the part department and, of course, stocking in its entirety, getting that cooperation with the service department and having them really understand, the impact that the special orders can have. And again, really getting the alignment of the service manager to then get the cooperation of the technicians. And again, there's some downstream effects there, technician training, things like that, shop operations, all those other things, which of course, we don't have time to cover all that, but sticking to our point of, hey guys, this is how we need to handle special orders. This is how we need to get in front of this and develop this strategy so that me and the parts department doesn't get overloaded, doesn't start taking on these parts that aren't selling because you ordered 4 parts and only 1 part fixed the car. Now I'm saddled with these 3 other parts that are just going to sit, age out, have a low percentage chance of selling, and then grow into my obsolescence to where obviously now then it's all on the parts department and they have to deal with that issue. And of course, as we all know, obsolescence absorbing that working capital that you then inversely need, to do effective stock ordering and get in front of it, as we're discussing today. So again, really getting the alignment with the service department and getting the understanding and getting that strategy in place to know, hey, we got to have, a correct process when dealing with special orders. That way it doesn't do the normal snowball effect and, of course, age out, as we all know they have a tendency to do.
Yeah, Dave came out and said it comes down to having parts and services one department, supply and demand. Very good point, Dave. Um, you know, the root of all obsolescence can be summed into two words: special orders, special order control. I'm going to give Blake just 1 second here. I'm going to give you a glaring example of something we ran into a couple of years ago. Is we were working with a dealership in Wyoming, and one of the most shocking things I think I had heard, but it kind of boils down to exactly what you said, Dave. Service and parts is one department. As we broke down, they had a GM and a Nissan store, and we were going through it, and we were looking at the obsolescence that they had, which wasn't terribly bad. But what the dealer said to the two parts managers and the service managers who were on the conference call almost made me fall out of my chair. He said, "Why do we have obsolescence?" And there was a lot of hemming and hawing, and I explained, the aging of parts and things like that. But he goes, "Well, then we have a real problem." And he goes, "If the service department or the body shop," they had a body shop, "if they order the part, they own it. It gets written off. Why do I have any obsolescence?" That led to some really interesting conversations. But this particular dealer said, if the service department orders it or the body shop orders it and the customer doesn't come back in, the service department eats it. That's really radical. But it really drove the point down that you brought up, Dave, is that, service and parts, technicians understand this if you really sit down and educate them. Is, hey guys, you are over ordering parts. The good news is we're fixing the customer's cars, but you order those 4 parts and give 3 back to the parts department because one of them fixed it. More than likely, that's instant obsolescence for those parts, and they take up valuable space. So, the technicians end up shooting themselves in the foot by causing parts departments to have to overstock parts that they really have no avenue to send back in many cases, or they're sent back with, a high restocking fee. But that's the type of thing that, I love what you say, Dave, and I hope your department works that way. Contacting customers, making sure only what's needed is ordered really goes a long way in best practices. So with that, Blake, back to you.
Yeah, absolutely good points. And I mean, Chuck said it. That's a great way to put it, Dave. I mean, that's exactly the emphasis there. And we even got some dealer principals on this call too, and that's the kind of top-down approach is, yes, understanding that it is one department. They should act in unison. It shouldn't be this conflict, this battle. It's exactly that. I mean, said it great again, one department. And it really is, you're serving the same goal, which is, of course, taking care of the customer. So acting with that in mind, yeah, absolutely said it best. Because kind of, putting this to this next slide, it is that balancing act. It's one of those, you do have to do what you do. Like Chuck said, the great news is you're taking care of the customer, but the bad part is you had to order all these other parts. Where does the inefficiency lie? Well, that's where, you got to take that discerning approach to figure out where is it at. And again, as we've discussed, and as it can come from different angles in both departments, service and parts. And that's as the first indicator there. You got to do what you got to do to take care of the customer. You're doing what you have to do, and so some of that is that reactive approach. But again, things we're discussing today, and whatever you decide, like the example that Chuck pointed out, very severe, very drastic. But hey, if that's the way that dealer wants to run that department, great. But with any strategy, it's one of those, you got to maintain the discipline of sticking to that strategy and working together. Is any of this, going to change, overnight? Usually it's not. It is a process of getting the technicians in alignment, getting the parts counter in alignment, with having to stick to setting boundaries or being disciplined on how we're ordering things, getting comfortable with that quote little bit of pushback to the technicians, and everybody's okay with that. But again, the overarching goal is working as one department, as you pointed out, Dave. But again, the ultimate goal there is taking care of the customer, which no matter who of us are on the phone, fixed stop, dealer, principal, all of that, all the way down the line, that's our goal, is taking care of the customer. And really, again, the second part is anybody that's our client, that's what they know is very specific to us, is we go in and we're, of course, configuring, the DMS to lean on, the phase-in criteria, and really, squeeze down that accuracy in terms of how the system is looking at parts, ordering the right stuff, getting in front of it, building that breadth. But all of that is, of course, to bleed away from, do I have to order everything, versus do I have it on a stock order and I'm getting the right parts on the shelf, so I can then prevent this whole process of course, being disciplined when it comes to a special order process. And no matter what, that last point there, some of that is going to inevitably be unpredictable. It's just the nature of what we do and the nature of parts and service and all that. And then, of course, the manufacturer, back order, things like that are out of all of our control. But again, it goes back to the main point of having a strategy, having one goal, working as one department, and then being disciplined across the whole board to stick to that strategy and really know what it means, for the long term.
Again, I want to emphasize here that please ask questions. If they're DMS specific, if they're procedural specific, that's what we're here for. We work with, 300 dealerships every day of all different makes on 8 different DMS platforms. So if there's something, as Blake is going through this, please, ask your question off into the chat side, and we'll pause and go through it, and I promise you there's no dumb questions. We keep learning stuff every day, with all the different changes manufacturers come out with. Like Pace just came out with a new program with GM, and, they basically took about 4% of their incentives away. But these things are ever evolving, ever changing, and us working with these managers, we have some pretty savvy parts managers we work with that we learn from as much as they learn from us. And so if you have some questions that are just burning that you want to ask, please do that by, chiming in on the chat.
Yes, no, absolutely. Great points, Chuck. Because again, these webinars are we're feeding largely off of what we see or what questions we get, the feedback we get from all of you. That's where we turn around and say, okay, this is obviously something we need to bring up as a topic. That way we can discuss it like this. But to Chuck's point, yes, stop us at any point, wait for the Q&A, whatever's preferable for you. We want to start this and again, stimulate some of that to bring up questions. And even after this too, if you have questions after the fact, if you're our client, great, you know how to get a hold of us. And if not, we're still open for questions, because this is what we're all about. We're in this industry together. And this one, kind of a quick slide. I mean, this is one of those, the obvious as it states, ripple effect or snowball effect when it comes to, again, not managing stock appropriately. From the service side, it's one of those, if you don't have the parts in stock, you're waiting on it. You got to turn the car out, you got to kick it out of the stall. The technician is now moving on to something else where, obviously having the right effective parts on the shelf is going to increase and turn that process, turning up bay turn rate on the service department side. And of course that makes everybody happy, but you're selling more parts, they're turning more parts, fixing the car, customers happy. It just has, of course, that obvious cascading effect. The negative one, again, we all know obsolescence. If it turns into unproductive inventory, that's naturally going to age out. It's tying up that capital in a negative way, restricting movement, allowing us to do positive things like increase breadth and that good stuff.
Back on that top point, folks, I'll give you a great example of we started working with Toyota Motor Corporation up here in the Northwest, and one of the problems that Toyota specifically has is they can't get dealers to put parts on their shelf because you can order parts at 4:30 in the afternoon and have them at 7 o'clock in the morning. And so they basically were living out of the depots, and Toyota doesn't have a stock replenishment program. But here was the point that was brought up. And this is where doing a seminar down in Phoenix for these folks a couple of months ago, they actually, as we talked about this and with their return program, which is fairly liberal, why wouldn't a dealer, a parts manager, build breadth into their inventory? And that was one of the problems that they were having. So we really focused on stall rate utilization and productivity based on the fact that, the technician, even if the part would be there the next morning, they still have to move the vehicle out of the rack, park it, and put it away. Wouldn't it be nice to get 80% of the job done, the vehicles done that day, and get that service bay utilization up? And it really triggered a point bringing that up to the parts managers, that carrying the breadth and inventory of the right parts is going to satisfy the customer and the technician and really help, turn the inventory more effectively. So that's what we've been working on for that. So again, Blake, back to you.
No, absolutely. Great point, Chuck. And it was great to see that too. We can anecdotally now see the increase in that. And this has only been over the last few months, but literally being able to see it in that real time, the growth of the inventory at those Toyota dealerships, and then the movement and quote, volatility of that inventory. It's really showing, how the increase happens. And it's great to actually see it in real time. And it leads us into our great point. We brought up ASRs or RIM, Aero, more so on the domestic side, even part side, but really focusing on RIM and Aero. Again, it's one of those, Chuck brought it up earlier, one of those, it can lull a manager into thinking that everything is happening for them, that, hey, this program is taking care of the ordering. I don't need to be hyper focused on it. It's kind of doing the work for me. And it can kind of, again, get them into that state where, it's all really just reactive. They tend to then lose focus of, I don't need to necessarily look at it because it's just being done for me. And of course, in our world, and if you are a client, this, that that makes us hyper focus on the non-guaranteed inventory because that's where the emphasis lies. Yes, guaranteed inventory is okay, and that's kind of the, hate to use the word trick with the ASRs. Yes, it's guaranteed inventory, so okay, we don't need to worry about it. But again, it's happening. It's automatic stock replenishing. Things are being done for me. But we have a good client we worked with quite a bit, and it's been great over the last few months. They are a GM dealer, pretty good size, sub $1 million, but reaching the $1 million point. But really the strategy they put in place, and it's great for us because we can literally see it in the data, see it in the financial numbers, and it proves that it can be done. Now we're on our side, and if you are a client, you know what we're doing in terms of effectively managing it. And this doesn't mean it can't be done outside of us. But again, we love it because, again, we can see it in the numbers. So case in point, implementing the strategy, and this has been time in the making, but starting with, again, whittling down obsolescence, getting that under control, stopping that bleeding per se, and really implementing strategies, everything we've already talked about, the two departments working together and getting a quote hyper focus on ensuring we don't have parts that are aging inadvertently or for no reason, not consuming that capital. So getting that under control then led into the part of, again, focusing on the non-ASR protected inventory. And now, again, the strategy of this was this manager had proven himself to take care of the bleeding. Okay, now there's trust there to then, okay, you can go spend money, and now we're going to take the proactive approach, lean on everything we've been saying with regard to phasing criteria, reliance on the data, reliance on the DMS to utilize, but then also, again, some of that instinct of the manager of, okay, what parts do I want to bring in and stock? And so the ownership there gave him the ability to spend money, grow breadth in a very strategic way. Again, we were there as a backbone, putting parts in the right place, the right commodity, utilizing the right day supply, the right phasing criteria, which anybody can do relying on the power of their DMS. But it's one of those, was allowed to then go spend money, create breadth. Over time, they put the breadth in, they put the right parts on the shelf, and naturally having the part there, go figure, they're selling those parts. Well, the way that the reactive nature of the ASR works, obviously they start selling parts, well, then it gets on RIM's radar. Lo and behold, the part ships from unprotected to protected. So again, we can see this growing trend that through this manager's strategy on how to handle that inventory, it's shifting from spending some money non-protected and now growing from sub 50% of their inventory being protected. Now that inventory is nearing, 60% being protected. And again, whilst growing, and they're on their way to $1 million inventory, starting well below that and adding honestly about at this point, it's been about a $250,000 in growth. But again, that's kind of our point today, is an effective strategy is what is needed to, again, implement all those moving parts, but it can be done, and the numbers don't lie. They tell the tale of, again, the focus is on the non-protected. They're not worried about the protective inventory, and that's where, again, you can't take a back seat with an ASR and just think it's doing everything for you. Those are still, by and large, a reactive program to stocking. And that's where the manager and through services like us, taking an emphasis on those non-protected parts really matters. And so again, that's why we're bringing up the discussion today on what is an effective strategy and why would you do it.
Coming up for breath there, Blake.
It's a good time to do it.
Yeah. if all of you wouldn't mind over in the chat, if you happen to be on RIM or Aero or ASR 2.0 Nissan, if you would post that in the chat, just, simple, Aero, RIM, PartsEdge. Thank you, Randall. Yeah, here we go. RIM, Aero. Look at that. There's SRD. SRD, I would assume, is BMW. We're on RIM, ASR 2.0, and PartsEdge. Okay, Dave. Yeah, Dave has 3 of them. Okay, so hi, Craig. How you doing? So anyway, when you think about that, now in this window, I'm going to ask one more question and ask you to post it. And be honest, be transparent. There is no right or wrong answer. How many of you go out and actually run a stock order on your DMS based on the people who posted here? Do you run a stock order on your non-guaranteed parts on a daily or weekly basis? If you could post that over on the right, all of those watching, you can see some of the answers, because, hey, look at that. Yes, daily, weekly. Okay. Okay, so Randall, thanks for being transparent there. What we tend to see is that, especially with GM and Chrysler, is that there are parts you're selling that aren't guaranteed. And I'll tell you, I can count it on more than these hands, many times that I always will ask, like, I'm going to use GM as an example, a GM parts manager, and I say, do you ever run a stock order on your non-protected parts? And they go, why would we? And I go, okay, you have a part you sell, it goes to zero. You're selling enough of it, but the manufacturer hasn't picked it up. What do? Well, we emergency purchase it or we throw it on a CSO daily to get it here the next day, being very reactive instead of proactive. And so a lot of you, like you got there, you're running at least looking at the stock orders weekly, if not a couple of times a week. You'll find out you'll be able to be a lot more proactive on the stuff that's not guaranteed that you're selling. And thank you, Dave. Recalls and powertrain fall into this, so. Do you happen to be Hyundai or Kia, Dave? Just curious, because, sometimes, especially with PartsEdge, bringing that up, one of the things we see with PartsEdge is that they're very good, especially with two manufacturers. They'll guarantee parts, or let's not call it guarantee, they'll control the parts, but they're not guaranteed. They get over 13 months old, and you sit there and go, well, this is on the PartsEdge controlled list. Why is it not returnable? And a lot of times that falls into either a low-cost part, a campaign part, or campaigns with Hyundai and Kia. They don't allow you to return them, period. If you get it and you don't fulfill it, you own it. So that's another strategy to really pay attention to and maybe isolate those campaign and powertrain items completely separate so you don't accidentally get stuck with some of these high dollar campaign items. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for posting that. That was really great. And I'm glad to see that you're all proactive doing that. So, and as Dave said, subsource them. And Dave, if you ever had a conversation with us, we're the kings of sources, creating 50, 60 sources to break everything out by commodity and so forth. That's what we do. So Dave, you're on the right track. So with that, Blake, back to you.
Oh, great points. Thank you, Chuck. And really, it's the whole point of what we're bringing up today, developing the processes for our, the goal of what we all want, a healthier inventory. And again, like Chuck even, pointed out, it's a great segue into that. I mean, that's the backbone of what we do, but I want to say, not, is it rocket science? No, but it's one of those, we put in complex strategies. And if you are a client on this call, that, but then of course we're doing all the legwork. Can it be done on its own outside of that? We definitely leave that up to you and the capabilities of you or your manager. But again, like that first one, you got to break it into manageable ways, but break it into smart ways based on the commodity, based on movement, things of that nature. Really getting it, like Dave said, breaking it down to that sub-sourcing so that it can be effectively handled for what it is. And just being smart about it. Again, our clients know we have our strategy. It's pretty specific. And again, we have that implemented across the board, and that's our strategic approach that with some pretty good confidence of your client, this, we got a lot of confidence behind it that it's very effective at achieving this result. But again, it just takes some effective management to get it in that place. So, and then again, we've discussed it, refining the order processes, really, again, breaking it down, utilizing, again, phasing criteria, things of that nature, leaning on the DMS and what it's capable of to really save the manager time and ensure that they know what they're looking at, is accurate, specific, again, like a strategy based on commodity, really just getting it to a point where it's a quick process. So whether you do it daily on those unprotected parts, or again, if you don't, can you start implementing it and really then getting it in bite-sized chunks so that you can effectively get through it and again, rely on the DMS to appropriately, adjust the part based on that phase and criteria that you've set. And again, different industry tools and techniques, again, we're one of those tools. But again, the DMS, other pieces of it to again rely on the data of your inventory of your market there, analyzing that stock order, for its efficiency, and again, ensuring that you do get the right parts on the shelf for their purpose. And then really, I mean, how does this play out in the end? It goes back to our point of, again, the unity between the two departments, kind of culminating in that fixed ops perspective. But again, can we show it? Can we track this? Does it actually show up anywhere downstream, being profitable from the parts department and the service department? And again, as this slide points out, using turn rates, bay turn rates, inventory turn rates, we could have a whole other discussion of, how the DMS portrays, inventory turns. Chuck could go on that for hours. But it's one of those, that is an effective metric to say, okay, how is it turning? How is the organic life of my inventory turning over, and is it working? Those are some key ways to know that it is being done right. It is efficient. It is turning over properly. Do I need to scale it up? Do I need to scale it back? Using some of these key points to understand if it is actually working, if it is an effective strategy. And again, pretty common one, but we like pointing out, of course, margin growth, profitability, that's a key point to say, hey, and that's a whole nother discussion, with pricing, but having the right part means you're going to sell the right part. So again, selling more parts, it's going to equate to more margin growth. And again, on the service department, working again as one unified front, they have their metrics to know via those KPIs, is this working? Bay turn count, fix right the first time, how long, the RO is open, things of that nature, relying on that as well to say, hey, is this strategy effective, or do we need to implement some other things? And again, relying on each other and the things you both have at hand to measure, again, the effectiveness of the strategy that you're putting down.
Yeah, and Blake, going back to the first bullet point, using turn rates as a baseline, one of the things, and you all can chime in because Kaylee's listening in, some of you, if you happen to be on CDK or rentals, the management reports haven't changed in 40 years. It constantly baffles me that DMS management reports haven't caught up with the times. For example, CDK, when you look at your turns, they actually still call it a true turn. And what they do there is on their true turn, they actually subtract out, any emergency purchases or daily orders. And this day and age, true turn used to be really critical 35, 40 years ago when it was written, because you only had weekly stock orders and you got discounts. So trying to order as much as you could on a stock order, looking at your true turns really helped in the breadth and width of an inventory. This day and age now, they've removed, basically, unless you do QPOs with the different manufacturers like a CPVP with General Motors, basically there's no difference between a CSO and a DRO, except a DRO is guaranteed or an Aero order is guaranteed, But my point being here is that you want to look at your turns, taking your cost and dividing it into the inventory, cost of sales divided into inventory. And we have a simple 2-slide PowerPoint that we can show you how to calculate your day supply or your actual turns very simply by looking at your management report and doing that. So all you have to do is reply in the chat that you would like to have that emailed to you, and Kaylee can do that. And we'll send you that PowerPoint so you can easily calculate turns this day and age. So, and next month, on the second bullet point, next month we are covering matrix. I just did a webinar back in December on it, and we're going to redo it here. We're going to redo the webinar on matrix, how it's effective, how it's working, things like that. So anyway, I wanted to at least cover those 2 points, Blake, so continue.
No, great points as usual, Chuck. And really, that kind of gets us to the kind of summary of all this. Again, we know the needs of the service department. Some of that is unavoidable. Some of that is going to be reactive by nature. But again, that doesn't mean don't sit down and again act as one unit and develop a key strategy. Have all the key people in the room, managers of both sides, and really make that conscious decision that, hey, this is the factors I deal with. This is the factors that parts deal with, factors that service deals with. You all have your OE designated programs. And if you're part of an ASR, that can become more critical. If you're not, you still have your elements of the OE. If you're like a Subaru, like Dave pointed out, PartsEdge, that's pretty effective at stocking. But no matter what, it's again, that unified front as a dealer, as two departments, understanding what the strategy is for special orders and the other things that can either negatively contribute to a bad inventory or can positively contribute to a healthy inventory. And that's kind of point again of this discussion today is no matter if you're on an ASR, you're not on an ASR, you're on a good one, you're on a quote bad one, using that term bad, but again, it is really just about developing a wholehearted strategy and understanding that you got to have the discipline to stick to it and stick to the process, and over time, regain that health or maintain the health of taking a good solid inventory and taking it to the next level, increasing profitability, which of course, we all want that. So with that, again, if you have any specific questions, like the last point there, leveraging some specifics within your DMS, like Chuck pointed out, we work with the bevy of all different kind of DMSs out there. We work with every OE. We've even started touching into potentially being able to do Kubota. So that's where we deal with. We deal with everything, but that's again why we want to do these webinars. Is to start the conversation, to point some key things out we see changing in the industry, and some things like stock orders is again revisited to bring up the importance of it. So we'll kind of open the floor, Chuck, if you have anything to point out there. But this is where, well, Dave has a good question there. I might field that one to you, Chuck.
I'm assuming, Dave, 16% depreciation between insurance and pricing strategies on every part on a shelf, not protected every month. Are you talking 16% monthly? Propeller head's way above me, folks. Thanks, Dave. He says yes. Propeller head's way above me. At one time when we were working with American Honda back in 2004 through 2008. We had the ability to sit in with some pretty high level people. And what really amazed me was they calculated that if you had a part that sat on your shelf and didn't sell for 10 months, okay, follow this bouncing ball. You got a part on your shelf, no history. Now it hits 10 months on your shelf, and all of a sudden you sell it. Based on a 40% profit margin, you just broke even because of the holding costs. When interest rates were lower, that pendulum moved a little bit out to about 12 months. But when you really think about it, Dave, yes, you could almost call this, and I've had a few questions already toward the end of the year and the first of this year asking about LIFO. And dear God, I am not a CPA, and that's a calculation and a tax break that I don't know how they come to those statistics, but I'm not an accountant. But I can tell you that as you think about your aged inventory and your idle capital, of course, Dave, it's depreciating, even though, it sits out there on the shelf, and then you sell it and utilize a profit margin. More than likely, if you're selling some of those older parts, you're actually probably losing money if you don't sell it above retail. because of that reason. So that was a great question, and that goes back to ASR. And Dave, you got me on a tangent here, but I'll bring it up. When you think of ASRs, and again, we tend to see this mostly with GM and Chrysler, but other stores as well. Ford seems to do a great job with RIM, and I've seen some Subaru people out there, and it does show that PartsEdge is totally controlled by the manufacturer, because what PartsEdge does for Subaru isn't the same with Hyundai and Kia, not even close. But my point being here is, as we look at the guaranteed inventories, of RIM or Aero, and we look at the percentage of it, and we have a category we call forced stock, which is really unfulfilled demand. And the unfulfilled demand, we put that in a category, or if the year sale is 2 or less, it would have never hit a traditional 3 and X phasing criteria, no matter 3 and 9, 3 and 10, 3 and 12. If the year sale is 2 or less, somehow, some way, it never met your phasing criteria and got in. So thinking about that, we actually use that measurement in the ASR programs. And it was the GM parts managers about 15 years ago that coined this term, and it's so true. They called them one-hit wonders. They have to remain 85% compliant. So they have to take 8.5 out of the 10 parts that are suggested to remain compliant under PACE. And then all of a sudden you see 35 or 40% of the parts that are suggested by the manufacturer, they've had one sale or 2 or 0. You post a lost sale on a part. That's why GM parts managers and Chrysler parts managers never post lost sales, because the minute they post a lost sale, the manufacturer picks it up. So now think of, and this again, and manufacturer programs, these ASRs, they are what they are, folks. And I'm not trying to beat them up. There are some good things, but they were designed for and primarily meant for the manufacturer to help them control their supply chain. But they turn some dealerships, a lot of dealerships, into mini warehouses. You have to remain 85, 90% compliant, depending on the manufacturer you're working with. And when you have to do that, and they put these marginal parts with limited sales, the good news is it's guaranteed. The bad news is 35 to 40% of that inventory are one-hit wonders. In other words, you bear the holding costs. The manufacturer gets to put it out on your shelf. Hey, we hope it sells. If it doesn't, you get to return it back after X amount of months. But that brings up the point that now, Dave, thinking about even depreciation to some degree on these ASR programs, that can come into play as well. They're letting the dealer bear the cost. So those are where, when people tell me they're 100% compliant, I go, oh, dear God, you need to do something. If you got to be 90% compliant, be 91, 85, be 86, 87. That's what we tend to see day in and day out as we break these down and go through it. And then Chris has a question. How do you handle day supply for tires? I have struggled to get that right. Chris, here's what we do. And maybe this will help you out a little bit. Obviously, almost everyone listening here, you break out your tires into a different source for 2 reasons. Because you have a completely separate asset account and because of sales. And a lot of people, Chris, they're on a tire replenishment program through Tire Rack or Dealer Tire or whatnot. But here's what we do to establish a baseline for tires. It's a completely different commodity compared to accessories or maintenance parts, okay? And so what we do is we go in and set the phase-in criteria to 2 demands in 6 months. Make it fairly liberal. If it's had 2 demands in 6 months, that's fairly liberal to at least review it. The phase-out is going to blow your mind. We set the phase-out at 1 and 3. Because what we found out is with these tire manufacturers, most of them, they will replenish and take back tires yet aren't selling. And in the tire world, what you want to make sure of is that if you haven't sold a tire in 3 months, get it back, get it exchanged, or send it back to them, because they're more than likely going to take it back at 6 months or at 3 months rather than 6, 9, or especially 12. They've moved on. So you have a very liberal phase out criteria, 2 and 6 phase in criteria. And basically, one of the things you want to do in that is set like your per job to 4. Nothing is more irritating than, oh, my best stocking level is 3 and you got 3 tires, and then someone comes in and wants a set and you got to go get one. So that's where we see a lot of excess inventory. Chris, is where we tend to see it based on that is in gas, oil, and grease. We always seem to see the most excess inventory, and in tires, because you want to make sure that you're carrying at least 2 of them, if not 4 a set. The last thing you want to do is have 1 or 3 and not have a complete set and have to go run and get it. So that's where, when you think of a traditional phase-in criteria, we tend to use a baseline of 3 demands in 9 months, and then a phase out of less than 1 demand in 6 months. That's just a baseline we use that works. Tires and accessories are completely different. We set those up in a 2 and 6 phase in, and if they're not selling in 3 months, get rid of them. So I hope that answers your guys' questions. But Dave, I love your question, and just so you know, even protected inventory will depreciate. When 30 or 40% of that inventory out there is one-hit wonders, you got the same problem you have as the unprotected. So there you go. Any more questions, please ask. We'd love to cover them.
We're doing pretty well, Chuck. We've got 8 minutes left before the hour, so we're sneaking it right in there.
And next month, folks, I would highly recommend, if you're thinking about looking at your pricing and stuff like that, one of the things, with, the words warranty uplift, that seems to be kind of a hot button over the last few years, trying to get a better markup out of warranty. Next month, you'll want to listen in on pricing matrix, how to look at your customer pay RO sales, how to analyze your matrix, and so forth. We'll be covering that next month.
Yep, all good points. I kind of put this up, key shameless plug, one of our good clients who, more than willing to give us some feedback there. But just to point out, if you are a client, you know what we're about. If you're not, we are just one of those tools that can handle the DMS side of things and taking, the labor and confusion out of setting up a DMS to appropriately leverage it to really ensure we're getting, again, that maximum efficiency out of that investment, which is the parts department. But if you got any questions on that or about what we do, definitely feel free to reach out. And in closing, again, thank you for your time. Chuck pointed out that's why we're doing these webinars. Again, our main goal is to share and stimulate some of this from the parts side, which again is what we live in. We live and breathe it. But working with so many different clients, so many different OEs, we hear a lot of feedback. And again, that's what brings up these topics that we want to bring to the industry and kind of share what we can and help out as best we can. So, but again, if you got any questions, please feel free. We'll give it the few minutes here. Again, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it, and hopefully we're helpful. If we haven't been helpful, direct all those to Kaylee. It's her fault. We'll blame her. But outside of that,
Good one. Good one.
I was seeing if you were still listening.
Oh yeah,
I'm
listening. I love how you guys are like, we want to do this. I had to pull teeth to get you guys to start doing these. So thank you guys for showing up and keep asking questions so we can keep doing these.
Yeah.
I know, I guess people showing up to listen to me and Chuck ramble on for a bit is, good proof that
Motivating, yeah.
Bringing up good topics. So
Yeah. Well, appreciate it. So, hi, Catherine. Yeah, repetition. Catherine comes up. Catherine Zimmer. Zig Ziglar said, repetition is the mother of learning, the father of action, which makes it the architect of accomplishment. Amen. Good old
That's a
Zig
good one.
Ziglar. I wonder how many people really remember him, Kind of dates me, but, I love that. I love that, Catherine. Thank you. All right, guys. Well, hey, at least, what's great is, Blake and I don't have to sit and banter back and forth. We got someone who's listening, but I really hope you pick something up on today, and I look forward to seeing you next month and covering the matrix.
Yep. Again, thank you all.
Thanks,
Certainly
guys.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a great day.